I was lying on the hay in an old barn, feeling the blood soaking everything around me and the pain tearing my body to pieces. My leg, broken and twisted at an unnatural angle, throbbed so violently that every breath seemed to be my last. Sarah was moaning nearby, her torn leg leaving dark spots on the floor, and the wound on her forehead was oozing blood down her pale face, mixing with dirt and tears. The smell of gasoline that had been poured over us was suffocating, permeating our nostrils with an acrid, nauseating stench that mixed with the dampness of the barn and the metallic taste of blood. We were on edge, and every sound, heavy footsteps outside, the drone buzzing overhead, the creaking of dilapidated walls, reinforced the feeling that we were no longer human, but prey trapped. The barn door slammed open, and a figure appeared in the doorway, a guy on a motorcycle with a tattoo of 007 on his neck and a knife in his hand. His leather jacket was stained with dried blood, and his eyes glittered with a cold, calculating light, like those of a predator who knows his prey is not going anywhere. He was followed by a small boy about 10 years old with a bruised face and a kitchen knife clutched in a trembling hand. His eyes were empty, but there was a strange confidence in them, as if he had seen this before. He looked at me and said softly, almost in a whisper, "You have to stay. They pay for it." The guy with the tattoo nodded at him, and the boy took a step toward me. I tried to crawl away, but the ropes bit into my skin, and my broken leg caused a flash of pain so sharp that I screamed. The boy bent over me, his dirty fingers trembling, but his movements were precise. He tightened the knots even more tightly so that the blood stopped flowing to his hands. They were numb, and my head was buzzing from the blow he had inflicted on me with the handle of the knife. The skin on his temple burst, and blood flowed down his face, flooding his eyes. "You're special, Carrie," the tattooed guy said, his voice hoarse, laced with tobacco and menace. "They chose you for a reason. Who are they?" I croaked, but he just grinned, wiping the knife on the sleeve of his jacket. "Those who are watching," he replied. "Those who pay. It's a show, Carrie. You're the main star." The drone hovered closer, its spotlight blinded me, and a voice from the speaker, cold and mechanical, said, "The next stage begins." I didn't understand what was going on, but I felt that it wasn't just sadism. There was a plan behind it, cold, thoughtful, and inhumane. The guy turned to Sarah. She lay motionless, her chest barely rising, blood from her leg pouring into the hay, turning it into a sticky, dark mass. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the center of the barn, leaving a wide trail of blood behind her. The knife in his hand flashed, and I screamed, "No! Leave her alone!" But he wasn't listening. The blade came down, stabbing into her shoulder. Sarah jerked, her muffled, gag moan breaking the silence, and blood splattered on the walls, flooding my face in a warm, sticky wave. I rushed to her, but the boy hit me on the head. The world swam, my ears rang, and the blood from the wound on my temple mixed with tears. "Quiet," he said, his voice calm, like an adult accustomed to such a routine. The guy wiped the knife on his pants and took a step towards me. "Your turn," he said, "but not immediately. They want you to suffer." He leaned so close that I could smell blood and sweat on his breath. The scars on his face seemed alive in the drone's spotlight. "Millions are watching, Carrie," he whispered. "Through this drone. They pay for your every tear, for your every cry. You were someone in your life, and now they want to see you break down." Tears flowed down my cheeks, mixing with blood, and I remember my life, school, friends, dreams. All this was bait for some sick experiment where I became a toy in the hands of madmen. But then there was a noise, not a helicopter, not sirens, but something alive, primitive. A dog jumped out of the darkness, huge, black, with burning eyes and bared fangs. She growled and rushed at the guy. Her teeth bit into his leg. He screamed, dropping the knife, and collapsed to the floor, trying to fight back. The boy lunged at her with a knife, but the dog dodged and sank its fangs into his arm. He screamed, dropping his weapon, and crawled into a corner, clutching his bloody hand to his chest. This was my chance. I rolled over to Sarah trying to untie her ropes, but my fingers were numb, and the blood from the wound made it difficult to see. The guy limped up, grabbed an axe thrown by one of the first tormentors, and swung at the dog. The blade plunged into her side. She screamed, jumped back, leaving a trail of blood, but did not retreat. Her growl became lower, fiercer. "Damn thing," he growled, wiping the sweat and blood from his face. He turned to me, the axe in his hand dripping with dark dog blood. "Do you think it will save you?" he said, stepping closer. But then a voice came from outside, rough and loud. "What's going on here?" The guy froze, looking around. The sound of sirens became clearer, and the helicopter that had left with the first 3 tormentors returned, hovering over the barn. The voice from the drone said, "Let's go. The experiment is over." The guy cursed, dropped the axe, and grabbed the boy by the arm. "I'll come back for you, Carrie," he said, dragging the boy away. The drone turned off the searchlight and flew away after them. Sarah lay motionless, her breathing stopped, her chest froze. The dog, bleeding profusely, crawled up to me and licked my face. Her hot breath was the only living warmth in this hell. I heard the bike start up and speed away, and the sirens were getting closer. I was left alone in the dark, tied up, with a dying dog next to me. My strength was draining away, and blood was flowing from my wounds, mixing with gasoline and dirt. But I knew I had to hold on. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something bigger, some kind of hunt where I became the prey. To survive, I needed to become a hunter. The police burst into the barn, their flashlights illuminating the nightmare. Me, bound and bleeding, next to Sarah's lifeless body and the panting dog. I was untied, but I could barely move. The pain and loss of blood turned my body into a solid lump of agony. Sarah was carried out on a stretcher, but I knew she was dead. Her skin was as cold as the earth under the hay. At the hospital, doctors saved my life, but my leg remained crippled. The bone was crushed in several places, and after the operations, I could only limp. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what was going on in my head. Every night I saw them, the guy with the tattoo, the boy with the knife, the woman with the camera. Their laughter, their cold eyes haunted me. I woke up gasping, smelling gasoline and blood, as if I were still lying in that barn. The police launched an investigation, but it sank into the void. The drone was registered to a fake, and the track stopped. I told them everything I knew, but they had no evidence. Then I decided to act on my own. As soon as I could walk, I started searching about underground betting, about shows where people pay for someone else's pain. I searched the internet, interviewed people, contacted journalists. The deeper I dug, the clearer I realized these are not just sadists, but a system. Huge, ruthless, like a machine that grinds lives for profit. One day I received a letter. No signature, just words. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last. Forget it." There was a picture attached to it, me in a barn, tied up, covered in blood. Warning. But I couldn't stop. I kept looking, but the fear grew. I was being followed, dark silhouettes on the streets, rustling behind me, calls from unknown numbers. One day, I returned home and saw a mess. Furniture was overturned, things were scattered, and there was writing on the wall in blood, "You're next." Then I received a message from a man who promised the truth. He made an appointment in an abandoned warehouse. I knew it was a trap, but I went, taking a knife and a dictaphone. It was dark inside. Suddenly, the light flashed on, and I saw him, the guy with the 007 tattoo, with the same smile that was in the barn. A boy stood nearby, clutching a knife. "You came, Carrie," the guy said. "I knew you couldn't resist." "Why?" I asked, clutching the knife in my hand. "It's a business," he replied. "People pay to see people like you break down. You were a star, and they want to continue." "You're monsters," I hissed. The boy lunged at me, but I dodged and hit him. He fell down, and the guy pulled out a gun. "You've lost," he said, aiming. A shot rang out. He collapsed, blood gushing from his chest. Behind him stood a woman with a camera, a pistol in her hand, and a crazy smile. "He was right," she said. "The audience wants a show, and you'll be a star." She pointed the gun at me, but I lunged at her, knocking the gun out. We fought, but she hit me on the head. I fell, losing consciousness. I woke up tied up on the warehouse floor. The drone hovered over me, its camera buzzing, filming. A voice from the speaker said, "The show is starting." I realized that this is the end. They won't stop until they kill me, and millions will be watching. The tears were flowing, but then there was a noise. The dog, the one from the barn, jumped out of the darkness. Her side was scarred, but her eyes were burning. She clutched at the woman's throat. She screamed. Blood splattered on the walls. I untied the ropes, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her. She collapsed, and the dog jumped back, panting. I stood up, staggering, staring at the drone. The camera was working. This is not the end, they will come back. I got out, supporting the dog, and disappeared into the darkness. But I knew I was part of their game. They will hunt me forever. A month has passed. I hid, but the shadows wouldn't let go. Every night I heard footsteps, drone, drone, a child's voice. You have to stay. One day, I woke up to the smell of gasoline. The window was broken, and there was a note on the floor. The show is not over. I ran, but they found me. In the field in the rain, I was surrounded by a guy with a tattoo, resurrected with a hole in his chest from which black blood was flowing. A boy with a knife. His hand was rotting, but he was smiling. A woman with a camera. Her throat was torn, but she was filming. The drone hovered over us, and its voice said, "Finale, Carrie." The dog rushed at them, but they tore it apart. Blood covered the grass, and I screamed until the guy grabbed me. His knife stabbed into my shoulder, the boy was cutting my legs, the woman was laughing, filming. The pain burned my mind, and I realized they weren't people. These are the demons spawned by those who are watching. They let me live. Bound, covered in blood, with the number 008 carved on her chest. The drone flew away, but I could hear voices, millions of voices, whispering my name. I lay in the rain, feeling my sanity bleed away. The dog was dead, Sarah was dead, and I became something else, not a person but a shadow, doomed to exist in their show. I laughed hoarsely madly. They won. I've lost my mind, and now I'm a part of them. The footsteps were getting closer, and I knew this was just the beginning.